will celebrate St. Anthony's departure on Monday. And let us go to Monday so I can get the story, and I don't want to miss anything from it. It's one of the most inspiring stories of our church. And everybody in the world knows St. Anthony of Egypt. So he was born in 251. He was born very early in the time of St. Athanasius, very early in the church history, in the 3rd century, but just early in the 3rd century. So 251 when he was born in a small village in the northern part of Upper Egypt, we call it. Beni Suef is something very close to where the pyramids is, where Cairo is. And his father and mother was very rich people, but they were also good Christians, very good Christians. And they loved the poor. And they read the gospel in their house every day. And they were praying, and they taught their son and their daughter. They have an older son, the firstborn is a boy, and the younger is a daughter. And when he became a teenager, and he learned the gospel, and he learned the way of Christ, and he learned also about the care for the poor. He was a teenager when his father died. And it says in the story that he stood before the body of his father, and he looked at him. And he said to himself, speaking to his father in his mind, he says, "Where is your zeal? Where is your ambitions? Where is your energy that you were actually working with, and you were collecting money and building up your fortune? Where is that gone?" He looked at him, and he was a dead body. I am very surprised. I've never thought about this, that when a person dies, everything stops. Everything. Then he said, "I'm even surprised more. I will be surprised more if I do the same." In his mind, he's making the decision. He said, "I cannot continue doing what my father did and end like him. I might have to do something different, because it has an end." He looked at the end. When the person dies, everything is gone. Then he started to think about how, it came to his mind, how the apostles, like we read today, left everything. And they were not attached to anything, and left and followed Jesus. And how people were in the time of the apostles selling their stuff and bring the money and put it before the apostles to give it to the poor. And he thought, how can I do this? I'm young. And he kept thinking about this question. So sometimes I always say this, and I say to myself, if I don't have a question, I'm not learning. If I don't have a question in my mind, I don't learn anything. I need to always start with a question. So his question was, what can I do? I'm young. What can I do? One day he came to the church and he heard this gospel. We're going to read it, at one point in the church. Jesus was asked by a young man, same age almost like St. Anthony at that time. The young man was rich also, same thing, same situation. Was asking Jesus, what can I do to enter life, to really feel, to capture my soul, to feel alive, to be happy. I want to be happy. I want really to be happy, not just excited. There's a difference between the two. To be excited is to get something new, and then you get excited about it for a day, get excited about it for 2 days, and then what? Everything loses its excitement. Whatever it is, a toy, a new dress, a new clothes, anything, new house, anything. After maybe a couple of days, maybe a week maximum, every excitement is gone. But he wanted to be really happy and to live all his life in this happiness. So he was going to the church and heard Jesus saying to this man, you really want to have happiness, go sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and you would have a treasure in heaven, and follow me. Jesus didn't say it from the beginning. In the beginning he said to him, go keep the commandments. What commandments? Honor your father and mother. Do not lie, do not steal, do not kill, do not hurt anybody's feeling. And he said, I've done all this. I feel like I'm missing something. I need more. He said, if you want more, if you want to be perfect, go sell everything, give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and follow me. Now, He's talking to him about capturing his soul, taking his soul back, and not let his soul go away from him and not be happy. When St. Anthony came through the church and heard Jesus saying this to the young man when it was read by the deacon, and I'm going to tell you something, most probably the deacon was reading very nicely, because you don't really get that impacted unless the readers are really doing their job. So he got hit and he got very attentive. And he said, that's exactly what I want. He heard this, and then he was worried. What about my sister? His father and mother is dead, so his sister is in his care, and he's a teenager, he's a young man. Maybe he was 16, I think, and his sister was like 8. He got worried about his little sister, and what would she do without him? So he went the second week and thinking about what we're going to do with my sister, and he heard St. Paul say, do not be anxious for anything, but in everything with prayer and supplications. So he said, that's it. I know that my sister will be fine. So he took her to a house where there were a group of women, like nuns. There were no nuns at that time, but women living together and praying and reading the gospel and working with their hands and giving it to the poor. And he said, can you take care of my sister? I'll give you also some money for the house. And they agreed. So he went out of the village after selling his house and his land and everything they have, and kept a little bit of money so that he can buy some food from time to time. Then he lived in a little hut made out of reeds at the Nile, by the Nile. And then he would go to the other people, hermits, next to him to learn, which is beautiful. He didn't think he had it. He thought, I really don't know what to do with my life now, but I want to give it all to Christ. But let me see somebody who had done this before me, and I go and live with them. So he used to go hear about an older man, let's say a man named Abraham. He would go to Abraham and say, Father Abraham, can you please teach me how you live this life? And Father Abraham would teach him about prayer. You go to another one, Father Simeon, and Father Simeon will teach him about fasting. Go to another one, and another one, let's say Father John, and Father John would teach him about vigils, staying up at night and praying. And he would learn from them, each one different thing. And after a while, after he got done with learning, he's learned a lot in like maybe a couple of years or so. He crossed the Nile and went to the desert. And then by the desert on the border, there was a tomb, ancient Egyptian tomb. Most probably it was open, so he entered there and he lived. It's usually like a cave inside the rock. And he lived there. And he started to pray and fast and do the vigils and to cleanse himself, to actually work on his problems. If he had temper, he had to be patient. If he had thoughts of envy and jealousy, he had to be more loving. And he worked on that day and night. And then there, he had a little sycamore tree, like a fig tree, and he was to eat from it and drink from the water of the Nile. Today they have like a monastery in that place. They call it the monastery of Maimun. There the devils fought against him big time and physically hurt him until one day he could not speak. They physically hurt him too much that he was unable to speak, and he was in a fever. So his friends thought he's going to die. They took him from there and put him in the church. In the morning, they found him okay. And he said, I'm going to go back. You go back. They were trying very hard to kill you, and you want to go back to them. He said, no, I'm not going to let them overcome me. I'm going to go back to the place they fought me very much. After that, he left the place, left the whole Nile region, the green area. And you know, Egypt is very deserty, sand, except that with the little line, the delta up in the north, and the little line of green. But the rest of Egypt, from the Red Sea all the way to the borders with Libya and even across, is the great desert, a huge expanse. Now you cannot really see the end of it, sand dunes. So he went to the east side toward the Red Sea, and there was a place where travelers go by to get water from a spring, a natural spring out. And he said, he looked, and there was a mountain next to the spring with caves. He took one cave and lived in it. And he continued his work of asceticism. We call it asceticism, which is fasting, prayer, vigils, fighting the ideas and thoughts, fighting the passions, the feelings that's not godly. And God helped him. And he lived there for 20 years. After 20 years, people started to notice and know those caravans of trade going back and forth knew that Anthony lived there and knew what was his life like. And they told everybody. So everybody in Egypt and even in Palestine heard about Anthony. By that time, there was nothing called monasteries. Nobody knew about it. He was the first one to establish that. So many young men came and lived in the other caves around him, and he established a community. He started to show gifts of healing. People with sickness and demons, he would go to Anthony, pray for them, and they would be healed. They came to him to ask how to do with certain spiritual problems, spiritual guidance. They wanted his guidance, what to do with different problems. Someone was very addicted to something, they would go to Anthony and say, what do I do with that addiction? I'm addicted to video games. No, there were no video games in the time of Anthony. So I'm addicted to whatever. I'm addicted to eating. I'm a big glutton and I eat a lot and I don't know what to do. So Anthony would give him an advice. I can't really read the Bible. I don't understand it. We'll go to Anthony, he would give him advice. I don't know how to deal with my brother who is fighting with me over the inheritance. Go to Anthony and he will solve it. So at that time, he started to be called the father of monks because many people took his example. They wanted to be like him. He actually went to Alexandria twice. Alexandria was the big city in Cairo, in Egypt at the time, not Cairo. Cairo was not there yet. Cairo started to be a city in the 7th century, in the time of the Arabs. This is way before Alexandria was the capital of Egypt in the time of the Greeks. He went there twice. Early 4th century, 311, during a persecution, one of the hottest persecution on the Egyptians, which in the time of Diocletian was by Maximinus. Maximinus was his partner. Diocletian and Maximinus were two emperors at the same time, and they were fighting the Christians very hard. They want to stump, they want to extinguish the Christian faith. So he went to visit prisoners that was captured by the Roman emperor soldiers, and he didn't care. He said, the best thing would happen that they would take me and I'll be a martyr with them. He would go there and give them comfort, talk to them about the promises of Christ and how they stand fast in their witness for Christ. And then they didn't get him. Nobody put his hand on him. He was not captured. He was not imprisoned. He left back to the cave, and the second time 44 years later, in the time of the Arian heresy, where he went to establish and strengthen the faith of the Orthodox in Alexandria, because there was another heresy that's coming to change people's mind about Jesus, that Jesus is not God. So St. Anthony said, no, stand with St. Athanasius. He is correct. So Athanasius depended on St. Anthony a lot. Kings respected St. Anthony, which is very interesting. He didn't look for honor. St. Anthony left the world so that doesn't get honored or get recognized. He doesn't want to be the cool guy, the popular. He doesn't like that at all. But he left. But there is something that people learn from his story and other stories. Usually when you abandon fame to be famous, fame run after you. And they say it this way. They say, you run away from popularity, popularity run after you. Something to keep in mind. This has happened to Anthony the first time. Philosophers came to him and wanted to debate with him. They were atheists. And he knocked them all. It was very interesting. He had not learned, high education. He didn't go to universities, and they were like one of the highest class in the society for education. They go to talk to him, and he defeat them with his own philosophy, because he is there with God, and he's being taught by the Holy Spirit in everything he does and he thinks. He became so popular that Constantine, the king, heard about him, and he said, come. He sent him a letter. I'll send you a caravan to carry you and bring you to me, because I want to see you. I want to spend time with you. And he said to pray for him. They say in the story that Saint Anthony didn't want to read the letter of the king. He knew if he read the letter of the king, he's going to have to follow with whatever the king is asking. And he said, "Why you're not reading?" They asked him, "Why you're not reading the king letter?" He said, "But I have the letter of the King of Kings. I have not finished it yet. When I finish it, I'll read the letter of the king." So then eventually he answered the letter. He didn't go. He answered the letter with a prayer, and he commanded him to save himself and not to be very busy with the kingdom, that through his saving himself as a king, he will save his kingdom with himself. When the time came for St. Paul, and this is where we have the icon here, there's two men here, St. Anthony in the black garb and St. Paul in a palm, it's not palm leaves, it's the bark, a tunic made of the bark of the palm tree. He had not seen anybody. St. Paul had not seen anyone in his life. And St. Anthony wanted to go away from the community and want to be by himself and to be a celibate and to be a hermit. To be a hermit. So he went walking and he asked God to guide him. He prayed for this 3 years, and after 3 years he started walking in the desert until somehow he found St. Paul next to another water spring, another cave. And he saw St. Paul, and St. Paul told him, "I've not seen someone for the last 70 years. You're the first person to see, and I know you're coming here to bury me. God is sending you. The Holy Spirit has inspired you to come here so that I can be buried." And he stayed with him one night, and he buried him in the morning. St. Macarius, one of the father of the monks of the Shahid community, came to visit him, and he made him a monk. Many people had started to kind of go after his example. When he had done a lot of other things and built up the concept of monasticism and made many monks, he gathered his disciples and told them to stay fast and steadfast in what they are doing. And he said, "Give my staff to Macarius." He took this palm bark coat. St. Paul actually told him, and then another tunic he gave to another father, a head of monks, and he said not to show his body. That's why you will never find relics of St. Anthony. Nobody knows where it is. Some monks will say, "We know where it is," but I don't believe so. They hid it so that nobody can find it. So nobody finds, no church have relics of St. Anthony. And then he laid on the floor, on the ground, and then he gave up his spirit, so they buried him, and they didn't tell anybody where he was. St. Anthony's story was written, that's how we know it, by St. Athanasius, one of the best books on ascetical life, written by St. Athanasius. If you read that book, you would start with that way. St. Athanasius wrote it. He speaks about him a lot. St. Athanasius is very fond of St. Anthony. He said, he's writing as a letter to the monks in Europe. The monks in Europe. I think they were asking for his story in Italy. In Italy. They asked where around Rome, where to find a story about. So they sent a letter to St. Athanasius. We need the story, the life of St. Anthony. So he wrote it actually in a hurry, because the ship that was leaving quickly, and he started by saying, you compelled me to write the story in such a short time, and I don't want to deprive you of it. I'm going to have to write it in a hurry. And they're leaving maybe in a couple of weeks or so. And he wrote that beautiful book called The Life of Anthony. And every monk in the whole world knows Anthony, whether it is Greek, whether it is Russian, whether it is Roman Catholic, whether it is French. Every community on earth knows, and they own a copy of the story of St. Anthony. It is going to be a shame if us, the Copts, don't have the story and don't know. It's a big shame. And I think he is a landmark in the church history and in our spiritual formation too. St. Anthony has an impact on everybody who reads it. His things that he actually characterized by, and it really impacted me personally, the most impressive of it is detachment. Detachment. I think it impacted me so I read the story of Jesus and the young man, but I read the story of Anthony. It has this impact. Like, even he didn't much get stopped, he was not stopped by his attachment to his sister, which is something to very much to wonder about. That his sister, who was a younger sister, she lived to be a nun, and she grew up to be of old age. And of course, he heard about her again, but he could not stop by the attachment and the care for his sister. He found a solution for it and moved on quickly to what God has called him to do. And this is something to think about. He had not had any attachment, not to money, not to family, not to a place. He left the places whenever the places did not really help him pray. He would leave it. He would not stay there. Not to food, not to drink, not to clothes, not to scenes, not to friendships. He was not attached to anything. And he was free so that he can follow the only person that he loved the most, that's Jesus. He wanted to follow Christ to the end of his life, and he managed. May his prayers be with us, an example inspiring us. To God is the glory, Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, now and forever, and to ages of all ages. Amen.